until then, the law of war, humanitarian law, was really pretty much an academic topic. It was taught in some military colleges and in some better democracies, but it wasn't of practical significance because these laws were never implemented. War criminals were never brought to court, were never charged. And if the law isn't used, it becomes pretty academic and doesn't advance. And I must here say that one of my very favored organizations deserves a huge amount of credit for having kept up the law of war and its development. And that's the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, the guardians of the Geneva Convention. They updated those Geneva Conventions and the laws of war decade after decade, and called diplomatic conferences after each of the two great wars, and again in 1977 to update the law of war, particularly in respect of internal armed conflict or civil wars. But the War Crimes Tribunal really gave a push to the topic, and you can find volumes now of decisions, of opinions of the Yugoslavia and Rwanda Tribunal, new textbooks, references to them in the writings. And of course what's exciting, I think, is really hardly a day goes by without our being able to read in our newspapers, in whatever country we live, references to war crimes investigations, war crimes tribunals, arrests, whether it was Milosevic or Charles Taylor or lesser leaders. It's become very much a topic of the day. And it's a subject I'm now teaching, and I begin each of my weekly classes spending the first 5 or 10 minutes discussing with my students the events of that week. And I never have a class where there are no events of the week to talk about. So that was a huge and important development. The second, relates to the development of the law, and I know it's one of the topics that Patricia Morales is particularly interested in the series, and that is the development of the law relating to gender-related offences. The law of war ignored systematic mass rape, gender crimes generally. They were sort of brushed under the rug, mainly because the law of war was written and implemented by men who had no sensitivity to that issue, and that's changed. The work of the two tribunals really changed the face of the law with regard to gender offences, and that is well reflected in the Rome Treaty for the relatively new International Criminal Court, also sitting in The Hague. So those were important advances and successes. The other success we take for granted now, I'm happy to say, but it wasn't taken for granted when we began. And that is, many people questioned whether there could be such a thing as a successful and, more importantly, a fair trial put on by an international court. Could you get judges from 11 countries? Civil law countries, common law countries, from Russia and from China, could you get them coming together with prosecutors from 40 countries and really put on a fair trial? Well, now that's taken for granted, because there have been some criticisms of the inequality of arms between prosecutor and defense counsel, but generally speaking, there's an acceptance in human rights circles, in legal circles, that the trials that have been put on in The Hague for the Yugoslavia Tribunal and in Arusha for the Rwanda Tribunal have been fair and have done justice to the accused. And excuse, that's a train behind me. And of course that too is a very important development and success. These successes were sufficient to push forward the endeavour to set up a permanent international criminal court. And without those two ad hoc tribunals, the Rome Conference in 1998, in the middle of 1998, wouldn't have been called, and the Rome Treaty wouldn't be with us, and there would be no permanent international criminal court sitting in The Hague. It's still in its early years. It's effectively 5 years old. And what's exciting, of course, is that 105 nations have now ratified the Rome Treaty. Happily, Japan is the most recent of the countries of the world to ratify, and that ratification came through 3 or 4 months ago in July of this year. The International Criminal Court, let me end by making a few remarks about it. Its prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo from Argentina, a very well-known Argentinian and courageous Argentinian prosecutor, was appointed as the first chief prosecutor. And here he put together a staff. They've worked exceedingly hard, and they're now the first 2 people who've been arrested are in The Hague, and the trials against both of them, both cases arising out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, those trials are now at their early stage. One of the problems, of course, with that tribunal is that the Security Council excitingly referred to it the situation in Darfur and the Sudan, where certainly, if not genocide, very serious crimes against humanity have been committed against hundreds of thousands of people who live or lived in Darfur. 4 arrest warrants were issued and have been completely ignored by the Sudanese government. President Bashir of the Sudan does not recognize the legality or the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. In the clear face of the Security Council reference under Chapter 7 of the Charter. And President Bashir is acting in blatant contempt of the Security Council reference, to the extent that when the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, was recently in Khartoum, in the capital of Sudan, one of the people against whom an arrest warrant was issued, a cabinet minister by the name of Harun, was in fact promoted by President Bashir and made, ironically and contemptuously, the minister in charge of human rights violations in the Sudan. And this is a huge test for the Security Council and for the international community. Is it going to allow President Bashir to continue to act in contempt of the Security Council reference to the International Criminal Court? If it is, it's going to detract substantially from the credibility of this infant institution. And let me close by saying that the international community really has to decide whether it's serious in wanting international criminal justice. Does it want to stop impunity for the worst war criminals? Does it want to go back to the period before the Second World War, where evil leaders could do what they wished in the absolute knowledge that there was no court anywhere that could ever bring them to justice? I hope not, and I hope that this huge move forward is going to continue into the coming decades of our new century. Thank you.